Good evening, everybody. We are so happy that y'all are here. Friends from Colorado, friends from Randolette congregation, and we are just tickled pink that y'all are here with our family tonight, because that's what we are. It's one great big family. For our reading tonight, let's turn to Matthew, the 24th chapter, and we're going to read the first three verses. Matthew 24, 1 through 3. It says, "And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" With these thoughts in mind, let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Before we actually get started with tonight's lesson, I want to thank Uncle George for mentioning me in the prayers. And it was brought to my attention, we have friends here from Broken Bow too, that I didn't mean to leave out by no means, but I take them so much as family that sometimes I don't recognize them as guests, guys. And we know that the Harcos are near and dear to all of us here, and we are sure glad that they got to make it too. A lot of the reason I want to get this series of lessons together, as I said last night, but I'll reiterate for those who weren't here, is because of several doctrines out there. One of them is called premillennialism. It's been around for a long time, and they frustrate the gospel of Christ a whole lot and use these verses almost as their signature verses and try to explain that all of this was about the end of the world. And we found out last night that question number 1 was all the way through verse 35 was about the destruction of Jerusalem. And also, we found out in the early 1970s that Max King and a man named C.D. Beagle started a theory called the 80-70 doctrine, in which they claimed that the resurrection has already happened and Christ's second return has already come and gone, and it happened at the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and that the church was resurrected then. And I believe that this is a very much false doctrine proven by scriptures, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to study these three questions, is because through it we can find out that the questions that Jesus, or the questions the disciples asked Jesus, while one of them was about the destruction of Jerusalem, the other two were not. They were about the end of the world. For everybody, we've got books up here. They're absolutely free of charge. Please don't make me take these things back home. I've got my own copies, got multiple. There's 2 of them on the 80-70 doctrine. There's one on New Heaven and New Earth. Those are put out by the mainstream churches of Christ, but they're very good. I wouldn't bring them and share them if I thought there was anything wrong there inside of them. And then over on this side, we got copies of the lessons in case you don't get to be here for all 3 of them and you want to know what we're going to talk about. You can grab a copy of all 3 lessons and take home and study, and then you can call me next week and show me where I'm wrong, okay? And we'll discuss it, okay? Because I do make mistakes. I am not inspired. The only thing that inspires me is my love to preach the gospel of Christ. And so with all that being said, I want to take the time to re-emphasize a point that the disciples, when they asked these 3 questions, that they thought that they would all literally happen at the same time. They truly believed that the destruction of the temple would be accomplished by God, and when that happened, that it would only happen at the end of the world. Meaning that they truly believed that the temple and all the sacrifices therein would happen until the world was no more. But Jesus, in explaining the 3 questions as individual questions, was setting the stage for them to happen at different time periods, and was setting up in the disciples' mind their ability to see that they did and would indeed happen at different times and not all at once. The first question that they asked was, when shall these things be? And of course we know that it was talking, when they asked the 3 questions there, they had just come out of the temple and realized that the temple was still being built at that time. It had been being rebuilt. And it was still under its construction phases, and it didn't get finished till 80, 62 or 3, somewhere in there, if memory serves right. But that was being built, and it was magnificent. It was a huge, beautiful building, and it had some really big rocks in it, we found out. Some of them were as long as 40 foot long, 18 foot wide, and 12 foot tall, and weighing 100 tons plus. And so, whenever Jesus told them that, there's not going to be one of these on top of another, they automatically assumed that the destruction would be so great that it could only mean the end of the world. And that's the way they looked at it. Christ started explaining to them that there was going to be, let me back up just a little bit. Last night we looked at the first question about the destruction of Jerusalem. And during that discourse, Christ started explaining to them that there was going to be false teachers saying that they were Christ or of Christ, that there was going to be wars and rumors of wars, and he told them not to worry about such things, that kind of stuff had to happen. In fact, he goes on to tell them that that's not the end, but that was actually the beginning of sorrows. And he goes on to tell them that they'd be delivered up to the magistrates, they'd be hated of all nations, they would be offended, they'd be betrayed by one another, and a lot of false prophets would rise, and the love of many would run cold. But the gospel of the kingdom had to be preached anyway to the whole world before the end came. And we understand that end that it was talking about there was the end of Jerusalem, not the end of the world in that statement. Then he goes on to tell them about the abomination and the desolation of the Roman armies that encircled Jerusalem that was bent on destroying it, which of course we know they eventually did. And he explained to them, when you saw this abomination and desolation of the Roman armies encircling Jerusalem, people, it's time to get out, and get out now. Don't diddle, don't worry, don't worry about getting clothes, tools, anything. Just get out. And he told them, ladies, I'm sorry, but it's going to be tougher on y'all because y'all got kids and babies. And so it's going to be a little bit harder, and pray that it's not in the winter or on the Sabbath day. He tells them during this time of Jerusalem's destruction that there's going to be false prophets everywhere saying, here is Christ or there is Christ. But he said, whenever I come and destroy Jerusalem using the Roman army as my weapon, everybody's going to see it in Jerusalem's eyesight, and it's going to be like a lightning bolt going across east to west. And we know that that is also a reference to the destruction of the end of the world that I think we will get into tonight for just a little while. And he tells them in verse 34, just about where we quit last night, that all these things would happen in that generation. And so that is very important to understand that at that time frame forward, from that verse forward, everything Jesus said was going to happen to those people standing there. And from then on, it was going to be at a later date. So all of this sets the stage for question number 2, which is, what shall be the sign of thy coming? One of the problems that we read about in the Scriptures is that the Jews were always looking for a sign. There are several mentions in the Scriptures that where Jesus says that this adulterous generation is always seeking a sign. I don't know if that's something that was ingrained in the Jewish nation, that they just expected God to give them a sign for stuff, or really what the deal was. But the truth of the matter is, the Jews were looking for a sign. They wanted a sign. And that's why they asked this second question. With the first question, Jesus said there's going to be lots of signs. There's going to be earthquakes, wars, false prophets, all kinds of stuff going on that's going to show the destruction of Jerusalem. But as we're about to find out that at Christ's second coming, there's not going to be a sign. That's the key difference between question number 1 and question number 2. There would be signs for number 1, but there will be no signs for question number 2. So with question number 2, what shall be the sign of thy coming? The disciples are asking, what's going to be the sign of thy coming when Jerusalem is destroyed at the end of the world? That's what they wanted to know. They didn't understand that these events were going to be separated by thousands of years. And of course, we understand that they didn't even really know what they was asking because they didn't understand the separation between the two. While Jesus tells them the signs to look for at the destruction of Jerusalem, he actually puts the second and third question together, referring to the end of the world. So let's get started with tonight's lesson. We're going to pick up where we left off last night in verse 36. And just like last night, I'm not going to say Matthew 24 every time. I'm going to say verse 36, verse 37, verse 30. You know that we'll be on that chapter till we hit chapter 25. Then please go to the next chapter. If not, you're going to be really confused before it's over. Okay, guys? All right. Enough funny stuff. Matthew 24 and 36. Jesus is talking and he says, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only." The first thing that I want you to notice is the difference between the singular and the plural. He starts off here saying, "But of that day," a particular singular day. The destruction of Jerusalem didn't happen in a day. In Matthew 24 and 22, it says, "And except those days be shortened, there should be no flesh saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." And we found out last night that Titus actually was going to do a starvation of Jerusalem that had already been started by Vespasian, his father, and that he changed his mind because he was needed back at Rome. So instead, he actually physically did an assault on the city, and it went to about a 4-month struggle so that he could return back to Rome. And we know that the destruction of Jerusalem didn't happen in a single day, but total it was over the process of about 4 years. But unlike the destruction of Jerusalem, Jesus here reverts back to the singular and says of that day. This ensures beyond the shadow of a doubt that the answer to the first question is finished. And we're starting the answer to the second question. In this verse, Jesus makes a definite statement. Nobody knows when the end of the world is going to be except his Father. Now there's some people that think that Christ knows the day, but specifically here he says no one knows but the Father. You know, and it's unclear to us, because the Bible doesn't give a revelation to us on why Christ doesn't know the date. The explanation's just not there. One of the theories, and simply take this as a man's theory, is it's not because Jesus is weak, but it's because we are weak. If Christ actually knew the date that the world was going to end, and he told us that date, well, we as human beings, we wouldn't pay much attention to anything, would we? We'd just kind of live nonchalant until about 2 or 3 days before, and we'd repent and be saved, wouldn't we? That's human nature. And that theory makes sense, but that is simply just a theory, okay? Verse 37 and 8 and 9 says, "But as the days of Noe were," and that's Noah, it's said different here for whatever reason is in the translation, but it's talking about Noah. "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So also shall the coming of the Son of Man be." So here the Bible compares the ark in the days of Noah and the building of the ark to the coming of the Son of Man, or the end of the earth. People are going about their everyday lives, doing their everyday things that they did every day. It was just another day. They were making a living. They were taking care of their family. They were marrying and raising families. Everything was perfectly normal till it started raining. It had never rained before. The people didn't get a sign that the flood was coming. Just all of a sudden, the rain came. Now, a sign that they did have back then was the preaching of a righteous man. But just like today, that soon became normal for them. So Jesus is telling his disciples, there's not going to be a sign at his second coming. Just like there was no sign in the days of Noah when the flood came, there's not going to be a sign at the end of the world. It's going to be boom, and here it is. And it's going to be over. It'll be too late. Is this all that the story of Noah tells us about the questions the disciple asked? I had always thought so, to be honest, until I did a study on these questions. It was brought to my attention that this also differentiates question 1 from question 2. Question 1 was over the destruction of Jerusalem. It had a specific geological location, which was Jerusalem, the city. Question 2 and 3 are going to be global. Just like the flood encompassed the entire world, so will the coming of Christ encompass the entire world. If you notice in the middle of verse 39, let's flip back there. And knew not until the flood came and took them all away. Okay? They didn't know the flood was coming till it took them away. Who are they talking about there? Well, they wasn't talking about Noah and his family, were they? Because they had a revelation from God and they built the ark and got inside the ark. But the other people were surprised. And they didn't know until the flood came and took them away. Who did take away? The sinful and the wicked. They're the ones that were taken away. Listen to the next 2 verses, 40 and 41. Then shall 2 be in the field. The one shall be taken, and the other left. 2 women shall be grinding at the mill. One shall be taken, and the other left. What's the Bible trying to teach us here with these 2 verses? I believe there's a couple of different things that it's trying to teach us. One is individuality. Well, we're going to stand on our own 2 feet. You won't answer for me. I won't answer for you. It's on a case-by-case basis, person by person. 2 Corinthians 5 and 10 says, For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body, according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. The second thing, I always assumed it was the righteous that was taken away. Because in 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 and 17, it says that the righteous shall meet the Lord in the air at his second coming. But in the case of Noah, it was the wicked that was taken and destroyed. The righteous were left on earth. Let's take a look at another passage that comes to this same conclusion. And that's Matthew 13 and 30. It's talking about the parable of the tares in the wheat field. It says, Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Jesus here is telling about the wheat field and the tares that was sown in it. And we know that the disciples are wanting to separate them. They're wanting to go pull them out. As soon as the tares were planted, boy, they wanted to get rid of them. And Jesus said, no, if you do that, you're going to pull up good wheat too. You just let them grow together. And at the last day, we'll gather the tares first. And then we'll bundle them. I'd never thought about that before. I always thought that when Jesus came back and we seen him in the air, that we'd be taken away to meet him in the clouds forever. And that the wicked would be left here and burn up on the earth when the earth was being burned. But apparently I was wrong, because the Bible says I was wrong, and I'm big enough to admit it. He said he's going to first gather the tares together. He's going to deliver them to hell or to Hades to burn. And then the righteous will go to the Lord, and he'll take care of this earth and burn it up. It's got to be that way, because that's the way the Bible explains it. So I got to believe it the way it is. Verse 42 says, Watch therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. And in this verse right here is the answer to the disciples' question. The answer is, there's not going to be a sign when Jesus comes back. Nobody knows when. Nobody's going to know when. It's just going to happen. But know this, verse 43. But know this, that if the goodman of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched, and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. So many times in the scriptures, the Bible uses that style of language for the last day. For the coming of the Lord. It says it's going to be like a thief in the night several different times. And what Jesus is trying to tell us here is to always be ready. Just like someone protecting their house from the thief. Because they don't know when the thief's going to be there. He's sneaky. He's going to sneak in. We need to always be ready to go to heaven because we don't know when Jesus will come back. But we know that one day He will. And if we're ready, He'll take us home. Verse 44. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. Here again Jesus tells His disciples, always be ready, because you don't know when I'm coming back. He tells them, I know you've always wanted a sign, but there's not going to be one when I come back. I'm going to use one of the commentaries that I used last night, Mike Criswell's, and he says this, and I like the way he phrases things a lot of time. He says, the believer not only remains vigilant because he fears being found unprepared, but because he anxiously longs for his master's return. Are we really looking for Jesus to come back? Are we anxiously waiting for Jesus to come take us home? Are we 100% ready if the Lord come back right this second? We need to be. Every moment of our life, we need to be ready to go home. 2 Peter 3, 10 and 11 says, But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the element shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness? Do you see the similarities between the phrases, be ye also ready, and what manner of persons ought you to be? The Lord's coming back someday. It'll be very unexpected by the people of the world. And when it comes, our chances of doing good works, they're over. You won't be able to try to get a better grade. Matthew 45 says, Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? This is what you call a rhetorical question, people. It doesn't need an answer because the answer is in the question itself, isn't it? A faithful and wise servant is one that's doing what his master always wants him to do. Taking care of the Lord's household is the way he puts it here. When we apply this to today, what's the household? Well, the household is the church. And the word them are the members inside the church. I think it's important that we understand that the word ruler here. And let's read that. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom the Lord hath made ruler over his household? The word ruler here is actually 3 Greek words in a row. Or actually 3 words. Hath made ruler is 1 Greek word. Excuse me. And it means to designate, appoint, ordain, or set. So when we look at it in the light of what the word truly means, we get a little bit different meaning. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom the Lord appointed to set over his household or church? That changes it from being a Lord dictator style ruler to being a caregiver. Someone who takes care of what his Lord's entrusted him with, knowing that he's going to stand before the Lord and give an account of how he took care of his Lord's church. Verse 46 and 7. Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Verily I say unto you, that he shall make him ruler over all his goods. Here I believe the message is clear that Jesus wants to convey. It's a beautiful thing in the sight of God when we take care of each other. The storyline follows the idea that if we're a faithful and wise servant, and we take care of the church and the people that are in the church, He's going to give us a reward of heaven. That's what He wants us to know. You take care of mine, I'll take care of you. Verses 48 through 51 says, "But and if that evil servant shall say in his heart, My Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken, the Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour that he is not aware of, and shall cut him asunder, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." That's the opposite of a good and faithful servant, isn't it? This guy abused what the Lord entrusted him with. The Lord's coming back someday. And just like the faithful servant will give an account for his actions, so will the abusive servant have to face the Lord with what he's done. We'll all stand before the Lord someday with our lives, our spiritual lives, naked and bare before Him. We won't be able to hide anything. There are two parables in Matthew, the 25th chapter, that we want to look at that go along with what we're talking about here in Matthew, the 24th chapter. It's funny how we as humans sometimes categorize things, isn't it? The books of Matthew 24 and 25 were broken right in the middle of the second question that Jesus was giving answers to. Until I did this study, I always thought that the second question ended with chapter 24. And the third question started with chapter 25. But the more I studied this, the more I realized I was wrong. And I think that the chapter break was probably in the wrong place. I want to take a look at this first parable in its entirety, read it start to finish. I believe it's one of the places that we was talking about last night where you can miss the overall picture by looking at the details too hard and don't realize. Well, let me back up just a second. I want to compare it to a day you had off work. And during that day you took a beautiful stroll through the woods and you spent all day long looking at the rocks and the creeks and the forest and the trees and all the little things. And you don't realize that you spent the day with the Master. And He showed me all of His wonderful creation. So we always want to look at the whole story because you can get lost in details sometimes. And we always want to look at the story. We're going to read about the parable of the 10 virgins. Matthew 25, 1 through 13. It says, "Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. They that were foolish took their lamps and didn't take no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept, and at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said unto the wise, Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But the wise answered, saying, Not so, lest there be not enough for us and you, but go ye rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. Afterward came also the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open unto us. And he answered and said, Verily I say unto you, I know ye not. Watch therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. For a whole lot of my life, I never could understand what the Scriptures wanted me to understand here. I never looked at it as an end-of-the-world theory either. I never looked at it the way the Bible wants me to. Here we got a story that relates to the church. It has many members in it. Here the number 10 is used, but I don't know if that number is important. What this parable is trying to tell us is we can live part of our lives doing what God wants. Just like all 10 of the the virgins were waiting for the bridegroom. All of us in the church are waiting for the return of Christ. But some of the people in the church simply are not wholehearted. They don't put enough effort into it. Not to be ready all the time. There's some days that they're ready, and there's some days that they're not. They live part of their life doing what the Master wants them to, but the other part of their life, they ignore the Master and listen to themselves and their heart's desires and what their heart wants them to do. The story is one that tells us we have to be ready all the time, no matter what. We got to be ready. If you want to, you can think of it like this. All of us was kind of planning a trip to the Ark. It kind of fell through with this economy and stuff, but we was all wanting to go to the Ark up there in Kentucky or Tennessee, wherever it is, up there somewhere. The girls knew where it was. I was going to follow them, okay? That's a smart man right there. But we all wanted to go because we thought it would be an absolute blast to go up there and spend a week traveling up there and seeing all that. I think how silly it'd be if halfway up there, Brother Paul ran out of money and gas both. He didn't take enough to make the whole journey. So that's kind of what this parable is telling us here. When you start the journey of being a Christian, be ready to finish it. Be ready all the time. Have your lamps full. Bring some extra oil. Whatever you got to do. But whatever you do, don't miss the bridegroom. Because then you've missed everything if you have. The next parable is the parable of the talents. Starting with verses 14 and 15 says, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability. And straightway he took his journey." So here we got a story of Jesus. This is Jesus, okay? Don't mistake it for anybody else. This is the kingdom of heaven. So it's got to be Jesus. Who calls his servants together, it says. And you know, that amazes me. I think it's kind of ironic that he uses the word called. Because one of the definitions of the church is the called out. Called out of sin. And so he calls his servants together. Once Jesus gets all of his believers assembled, he gave each one of them different talents. Here the scriptures use talents as a monetary type of instrument, but I believe the moral of the story would be our abilities to work for the Lord. Now, Jesus doesn't give everybody the exact same talents, but every man, according to his ability, he gave out talents. Now, what are some of these talents, you might ask, that he might pass out to us? Well, Ephesians 4:11 and 12 says, "And some he gave apostles, and some prophets, and some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ." From these verses, we understand that the Master has given different people different abilities, all within the church, so that the church can be edified and grow. Matthew 25:16 and 17 says, "Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. And likewise he that had received 2, he also gained other 2. And here's an example of what a good and faithful servant is, that we just got through talking about. It didn't matter how much they had received, they took what the Lord gave them and went to work with it. That's what mattered. The 18th verse says, "But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and hid his Lord's money." And here's the not so good and faithful servant. He simply didn't do anything with it, except to go hide it. One of the commentators that I read had this to say. He said, "This fellow was not a great waster, like the prodigal son, nor was he a great debtor, like the unforgiving servant. He simply hides what belongs to his Lord and refuses to put it to work. He's overcautious, unimaginative, and unenterprising." Good way to think about it. The 19th verse says, after a long time the Lord of those servants come and reckoneth with them. It sounds like us, don't it? Because we know He's coming back someday, right? That's what it's about, guys. This is the day that Jesus comes back, and we all get to stand before Him and explain to Him what we did with what He gave us. 20 through 23. And so he that had received the 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. And his Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. He also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents besides them. And his Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Here are 2 servants, the one that had gotten 5 talents and the one that had gotten 2 talents. They used what their master gave them, and they used it very wisely. They got a reward from God, they got a blessing from God, and they got His appreciation for doing a good job. We will never be judged for what we have, but we will be judged on how we use what we have. The amount's not important. What we do with it's important. You know, one of the things that I noticed in this story with both of these servants is that neither one of them bragged and said, Lord, look what I've done for you. Instead, they gave God the glory for the original amount that He blessed them with. And then they stated, because of your generosity, Lord, we were able to go to work. We brought nothing into this life, and we will take nothing out of it. The Bible says all that will follow us is our good works. The 24th verse. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not strown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. Have you ever noticed that the wicked and slothful servant actually starts off the conversation with the master by blaming the master for his own laziness? He tells the master, you're too hard. You're doing things that you're not even supposed to do, like reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't strawed. It's your fault I couldn't do something with your talent. You expect too much. Verse 25 says, And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there hast that is thine. How many times have we been just like this servant? We've let fear stop us from doing what the master needs us to do. Verse 26, And the Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reaped where I sowed not, and gathered where I have not strawed. Jesus tells him, it's not my fault you failed. I gave you something to start with. It's your own fault. You knew what I expected when you took this job. You knew what the demands were, and you failed in them by yourself. Verse 27, Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received my own with usury. Jesus tells him he shouldn't let his fear stop him. Should have never happened. At the very least he could have done was put the money in the bank, and Jesus would have got a little bit of interest back with his money. Maybe not a lot, but that'd be better than what he did. Be better than nothing. Verse 28 and 29 says, Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away, even that which he has. So in the end, this lazy servant is stripped of everything he has, which was the 1 talent the master gave him. He's actually in a position worse than having nothing. Because now he doesn't even have the ability to serve his master anymore. That was taken away too. Matthew 25 and 30. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Again, I want to go back to Mike Criswell's commentary. He says, the time of mercy is between the Lord's departure and the return, when each servant is granted the opportunity to serve. For those who serve well, there will be unspeakable joy. For those who foolishly pursue their own agenda, the Lord will personally pronounce a damning judgment. I think that this is more than enough proof to answer the disciples' second question. What was that question? What shall be the sign of thy coming? The answer is there ain't going to be a sign of Jesus' coming. You got to always be ready. You got to always be vigilant. You got to always be working, using what the Lord gave you. You got to always be prepared to meet the Lord your God. For a closing thought, I want you to turn to 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 1 through 6. 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 6. I love the way it starts this off, guys. It says, but of the times and seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. Brethren, I shouldn't have to stand here tonight and explain this to you. That's what the Apostle Paul's saying. You know. You know. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are all children of the light, and children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober.